Jeremy was sharing some news earlier about his dad. His dad's come home, and still a long road to recovery there, but that's good at least that he's been able to come home and he's out of the hospital. As we do begin Bible class this morning, we're going to ask Jeff, if he would, to come forward and lead our minds in a word of prayer as we start.
Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for this Lord's Day that we come together once again and give praise and honor and worship to you. We pray that all that we do will be in spirit and truth, and you'd be pleased with us. Pray that you will be with all those that are teaching classes this morning. Pray, Lord, they will remember the things that they have prepared and convey it to the students, and that we can all learn more of your word and have a better knowledge and understanding of it. We ask your blessings on all who are sick and having issues. We just pray that you would heal them, give them back their health if it is your will. Please continue with us through this service. Help us to stay focused on you. And we pray that you please forgive us for our sins. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jeff. So we want to continue our look at the book of Genesis, and we've made it to where we have been talking about stories involving Jacob, and in particular, just to sort of set the scene for our class today. Last class, we remember that it was time for Jacob to leave, to depart, and he was leaving Laban. He had been with Laban for a certain amount of time, and he had gained, Jacob had gained much while he had been there. He had gained a family, wives, children, herds, cattle, etc., etc. So the time came for him to depart, and as he did depart, Laban caught up with him, and he wasn't happy, if you will, about that, but they did make an agreement, and they left. They departed on good terms, I guess you would say. And then at the end of chapter 31, the end of chapter 31, it says, "And early in the morning Laban arose and kissed his sons and daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place." And so with that, Jacob now is going to continue on. Now, the first question, and we'll get to this in just a minute, but the first question is, well, where was Jacob going? Well, Jacob was going back home, and we're about to get into that in chapter 32. And we see sort of the likely path he took here on the screen, and that just gives us an idea of where they were traveling and where they were going. And I will make this point. This slide talks about this city being on the north, or maybe it's vice versa. Maybe it's the south. There's difference of opinions on did this city actually lay on the south or on the north, but because of some of the story we're going to read about them crossing the river and such. But nonetheless, just take this away from it. It was close to the river, and it was in this area. We see the Yabok River. So it's going to be in this area, maybe just on the north, just on the south, that we're going to see this city. But that's where we sort of set the scene as we get into chapter 32 this morning. So with that, let's look at chapter 32. Now, let me ask you, so what is like a bell that might go off in your head when you hear Jacob is going home? Jacob's going home, and he's going to meet Esau. Yes, sir.
Well, he's thinking Esau is still angry with him, and that his life is in danger. I mean, that's why he fled to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. So, remembering back to the circumstances where he departed, so yeah, you can understand how coming home is very nerve-wracking proposition for Jacob and his family. But that is what we want to look at today, how that meeting goes. So we begin in verses 1 and 2. So Jacob went his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And he called the name of that place Manahem. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, Speak thus to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I have dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight. Then the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you with 400 men, and 400 men are with him. So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided his people that were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels, into 2 companies. And he said, If Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape. So what's he doing? He's dividing what he's got, so at least he won't be completely wiped out. Some of them hopefully will be preserved. And the way that message came back, he is expecting the worst. He's expecting it to not be a friendly visit, a friendly encounter, if you will. So he's preparing for Esau to try to take out that vengeance that we have read about previously. And, you know, as we're reading the story, sort of put yourself, think about putting ourselves in his shoes. And so we see what he does next in this situation. He goes to God in prayer, and he says in verse 9, Then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, Return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. For I have crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. For I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. For you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered in multitude. So we see Jacob pouring his heart out to God, and we see also that he references, and maybe I'm sure it's more for him, but he references that God told him to do this. God told him to come back, and so with that, he knows what is about to happen. But he's going to try to make the best of it. He's going to do what he's been told, but he's going to do all he can to make it a good encounter, a good meeting, if you will. So picking back up in verse 13, and this is interesting what Jacob is going to do, because you remember back, and what prompted this animosity, this contention between the 2 brothers. You could say several things, but what was the most recent thing that prompted this strife between the 2?
Jacob had garnered the blessing from his father deceitfully.
Yes.
And caused that issue.
Yes. You say, what was the last? Deceitfully. Yes, exactly. He had tricked his father, and through deception, he had gotten that blessing. And so what you're going to see now is Jacob is going to offer all these gifts to Esau. And you can sort of think of it as an appeasement, as trying to make amends for what had gone on in the past. So picking up in verse 13, chapter 32, verse 13. So he lodged there the same night, and that's talking about Jacob, of course, and his family. So he lodged there that same night and took what came to his hand as a present for Esau his brother, 400 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels and their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 foals. Then he delivered them to the hand of his servants, every drove by itself. And he said to his servants, Pass over before me, and put some distance between the successive droves. And he commanded the first one, saying, When Esau my brother meets you and asks you, saying, To whom do you belong, and where are you going? Whose are these in front of you? Then you shall say, They are your servant Jacob's. Notice that wording there. These are your servant Jacob's. It is a present sent to my lord Esau. And behold, he also is behind us. So he commanded the second and the third, and all who followed the drove, saying, In this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him. And also say, Behold, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me, and afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present went on over before him, but he himself lodged that night in the camp. Okay, so there's all these gifts, if you will. There's all these animals that are going to be presented as an appeasement to his brother. And of course, this would take some time to move these animals and such, but Jacob sends them out now to go ahead of Jacob and to meet Esau and to hopefully appease him. And you notice he was very specific, even in the way he told them to go out. He's sending them out in droves, and he was telling them to leave some space in between them. So this first drove would come to him, and he would hear this, Esau would hear this message, and then there would be some time, and then that second drove would come, and he would hear the same message again. And so you would have multiple occasions to try to appease him, to try to, if he is mad, which we know he's not, but if he is mad, these will be multiple occasions to calm him down and to see what Jacob is trying to do by offering him these gifts. So even in the way these gifts are sent to Esau, you can see Jacob trying to diffuse the matter. Thoughts or comments that you may have to this point? Yes, sir.
You know, in this, seeing these events happen, you see a physical component and a spiritual component. Like with him leaving Laban, for instance, I think that the situation was getting bad there. The physical component was he needed to get out of there because Laban was getting things were going to get worse. But then God comes and tells him to leave, so that's the spiritual. So you got that working. And in this, Jacob is using he's using the wisdom to try to appease his brother in a physical way, is like these gifts. But he's also gone to God in prayer. So that's the spiritual component, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, I think we operate the same way. We take what we got, we try to make the best decisions, but hopefully we go to God as well and say, please bless, if it be thy will, bless our efforts here, and if it's not the right way, then, in some, way, fashion, show us, but I think we do the same thing. We have a physical that we try to do our best, and hopefully a spiritual that we try to do our best, and I think Jacob is a great example of that in these situations.
Yeah, and going off of what you said there about the spiritual component, I mean, ultimately, there is a story that God is unfolding in the Bible, and it's sort of the next phase in that story. It wasn't the intention, it wasn't the purpose for Jacob just to stay there raising cattle with his father-in-law, right? But there is a purpose behind the Bible, and so now it's time for Jacob to go back and for them to progress in the story. And so that's where we are taken now. So Jacob has sent out now these presents, but it says he stayed there in verse 21. So the presents went on over before him, and that seems to be in reference to that Jabbok River. They went on over before him, but he himself lodged that night in the camp. Verse 22. And he arose that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of the Jabbok. He took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, What is your name? He said, Jacob. And he said, Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked, saying, Tell me, your name, I pray." And he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Just as he crossed over Penuel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. Therefore, to this day, the children of Israel do not eat the muscle that shrank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip and the muscle that shrank. So a couple of interesting things here. We see Jacob's name changed, right? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And of course, Jacob's already had these sons, and we always hear the sons about being the 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay? Israel. Well, this is the point where Jacob's name is changed to Israel. And it goes from Jacob to Israel, and Israel meaning he who strives with God. And so we see there that change, that note. And we see the name that Jacob called that place in verse 30, Peniel. P-E-N-I, Penny meaning face of, and E-L meaning God. And then we see in the next verse a different spelling of that word, of that city, Penuel, but Peniel. And this is the place where where Jacob wrestled. One interesting point, I thought that instead of me trying to paraphrase it and put in my own words, I thought Brother Waldron made a really good point about what we just read here, about what just happened. Jacob's wrestling with the angel was parallel to the fervent prayer that Jacob was offering to God that he be spared from the hand of Esau. The angel who came to wrestle with him and Jacob's overcoming were physical demonstrations of what he was accomplishing through his prayer. This was God's message when he changed Jacob's name to Israel with the explanation, "You have striven with God and have overcome." God was saying, "Jacob, you've striven with me in prayer, and I've heard you. You have overcome. You need not be afraid." But Jacob was too afraid at the moment to realize what God was saying. We see a lesson here that is taught often throughout the Word of God. Our physical enemies are not the ones whom we should fear. God is the one whom we must contend or strive. And if we succeed with God, then we will overcome the world, not by physical means, but as Jacob learned, by relying on God. So I thought that was interesting perspective on this event that we've just read about. Thoughts or comments that you might have? Rodney.
One of the things, he's very fearful. When somebody brings 400 men to you, it's not really a nice greeting.
Yeah,
You're there, you're prepared for something.
exactly.
And so, when he prays there, it's interesting. In verse 12, he's reminding God, you remember what you said, Lord. You're going to make me, it's kind of, I showed you how fearful he was. He kind of like reminding God of what he said, what he told him.
Yeah. And also in that, he might be reminding himself, and maybe people are asking him, why have we come? Why are we going back? Who knows what might have been said? But you're right.
It's just that he was so fearful. I can understand that.
That was on his mind.
Because when a man done told you he's going to take your life, he knew that he wouldn't be strong.
But you know what? God had told him to do something, and he was fearful, but he carried out what God told him to do. Life's not always, sunshine and daffodils or whatever an expression might be. But there's challenges, there's hard things in life that you've just got to go through and have trust and faith in God and then just move forward in that direction.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I think about those God's people in the first century when they were being persecuted. And I've heard people say, well, they wasn't even afraid. Yeah, they were afraid. They were afraid, not fearful for their life. But they still done the will of God.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you see men in battle, they showed great courage, but were they fearful? You better believe they were fearful.
Yeah.
But they still done their job. And even though when we're fearful, we still must do what's right.
Yeah. and to that point, you used the example of the first century Christians, you know. There were things that they were obligated to do if they were going to serve God. And for example, meeting on the first day of the week. Somehow, some way, they had to meet on the first day of the week, even with that threat of persecution looming over them.
You think about that today. If our government today turned on us, he said, you know, if they threatened us with whatever, if y'all meet, this is what's gonna happen. Well, would we fold to that, or would we, you know, we would be fearful of that, but we would try to find a way to be able to worship?
Well, I don't want to get too far off track, but the whole COVID thing, when that was getting started, you know, early on, there was a lot of stuff being thrown around, but that was one of the things that congregations shouldn't meet, churches shouldn't meet. But we need to find a way to meet. Somehow, some way, we need to find a way to meet. And that's what we did.
Still going on today in California. right
Yeah.
now, you know. But, you know, you look back, and some of the actions that Jacob had done during this time, being fearful, running from his brother and everything, you know, it just makes me think that, or it shows me that Rebekah didn't tell them what she was told by the Lord, that the older is gonna serve the younger, you know. So, it's not like the actions that shows me that he's not, hey, this is covered, it's already been prophesied, he didn't know. So he's, like Robin said, he's following what the Lord's telling him to do now.
And that would have even would probably have even been confusing to them. Even if somebody had said, they were probably like, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm going to plow the field for my brother? What does that mean? But so nonetheless, now we come back and we're ready now to have this meeting between the two brothers. Were there any other comments? I didn't want to overlook anybody. So now we want to proceed on. We want to look back at 33 now, chapter 33. Now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming. So you remember that he had sent those gifts on, and he sent the family on, and then he wrestled, and then it was talking about as the day was breaking. Okay, so now Jacob is moving on, and then here's Esau. So it's time. Now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him were 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and his two maidservants. And he put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. Then he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. So you just envision, you know, when he talks about bowing to the ground 7 times until he gets to his brother, I get the impression, you know, he would bow to him, and then he would make progress towards him, and then he would bow again, and he's inching towards him, and he would bow again, and again. You see here, he's got his family even in ranks in order, and I mean, it doesn't go unnoticed that he had who in the back, Rachel and Joseph. Because Rachel was the one he loved. So now, verse 4. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And he lifted his eyes and saw the women and children and said, who are these with you? So he said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. Then the maidservants came near, they and their children, and they bowed down. And Leah also came near with her children and bowed down. Afterward, Joseph and Rachel came near and bowed down. Then Esau said, what do you mean with all this company which I met? You know, these droves that you sent, what is going on here? And he said, they are to find the favor in the sight of my Lord. And Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. And Jacob said, no, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then receive my present from my hand, inasmuch as I have seen your face as though I had seen the face of God, and you were pleased with me. Please take my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. So he urged him, and he took it. So we can see the relief that Jacob has in knowing that Esau still wasn't bloodthirsty and looking to take out vengeance upon him. So we have the encounter now between the two brothers, and everything seems to be good, seems to be patched up. Continuing on, let's see, picking back up in verse 12. So, again, Esau is there with some 400 men. But now Jacob has got a lot of people, but he's also got young people, and he's got a lot of animals, and he's got servants that are tending the animals, and the animals have children, etc., etc. So you can understand how Jacob would move much slower, and that sort of plays a impact into the next section. Picking up in verse 12, then Esau said, "Let us take our journey, let us go, and I will go before you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are weak, and the flocks and the herds which are nursing are with me. And if the men should drive them hard one day, all the flock will die. Please let my Lord go ahead before his servant, and I will lead on slowly at a pace with the livestock that go before me, and the children are able to endure until I come to my Lord in Seir." And Esau said, "Now let me leave with you some of the people who are with me." But he said, "There's no need. Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord." So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. Okay, so Esau agrees just to go on back and let Jacob come on at his own pace. Verse 17, and Jacob journeyed to Succoth, built himself a house, and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the name of the place is called Succoth, and Succoth meaning booths or huts. Verse 18, then Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram, and he pitched his tent before the city, and he bought the parcel of land which he had pitched his tent, and the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he erected an altar there and called it Eloth Israel. So I'm sure I'm butchering that. El Elohi Israel. So, and I'm behind on my slide there. Sorry about that. So we see there in talking about the Shechem, it says the land of Canaan, where promises were made to Abraham. You think about that, and that's going back to verse 12. We're coming back to this same city in this same area, and we'll look at it here in just a moment on a map. And we notice in verse 20 the name that's given to that Jacob gives to this city, and the name translated, it's God, the God of Israel. Okay, so we hear Israel a lot, but remember, this was Jacob who had just had his name changed to Israel. So it's referring to the person, the family. So he refers to it here as the God of Jacob, the God of Israel, not the God of Abraham, not the God of Isaac, not the God of your fathers, but the God of Israel. And that's what he named that city, that area. Just briefly looking at a map on the territory we've covered. This is the map we looked at earlier, how they came in by the river, and we see Menahem and Penuel, and we see Succoth here, and then they're going to make their way to Shechem. So you can see not only is he traveling with a lot of stuff, people and animals, etc. Not only that, but they've got to go through the valley, cross the river, come up through the hill country. So, that wasn't just a leisurely stroll. That would take some effort just to make it through those conditions in that area.
Like several hundred miles.
Yeah. And then here is a larger map of what we're just looking at. I know it's blurry, but up here is the area we've been looking at and talking about. And this is Shechem right here on the map. So that gives you a picture of where we are in relation to some of the other major landmarks in this area. Okay, so Jacob now is coming home. How long had Jacob been gone? Okay, 14, 20. Anybody else? We remember that he left out. He left out. He was running from Esau, but he was also going to get a wife. He worked 7 years for Rachel. He was given Leah. And then he was given Rachel a week later, but had to work 7 more years. So that gets us to our 14. But then he worked 6 more years for the animals that he was given from Laban. I say given. He worked for them as wages. Those 6 more years. And you know, sometimes you have to piece things together by people's age. But in this case, it's Jacob himself gives us how long he was there. If we go back and think back just a moment to chapter 31 in verse 38, he says, "These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes, your female goats have not miscarried their young. I have not eaten the rams of your flock," etc. This is when he and Laban were talking. So these 20 years I have been with you. So we see that Jacob has been gone from his quote-unquote family for 20 years, and now he's coming back. What did he leave with? We talked about how we noticed he didn't have any animals. There's no mention of him having animals. What did he have? Exactly right. We get that detail in chapter 32. We see that he left with his staff. Think about that. He left with his staff. Basically, virtually nothing. And now, what does he come back with? Large company. He's come back with a lot of physical possessions, thinking about all the livestock that we've looked at and mentioned, and all that went with that, taking care of livestock and such. But not just that, but he has gotten a family now. He's gotten 11 brothers at this point? 11 sons, 11 sons at this point. And one daughter, that's right. 11 sons and one daughter. And her name was? Dinah. Very good. And that actually leads us into our next story, what we come across in chapter 34. And so we'll look at this. And we're actually on a good pace, actually. So I think we got a chance of finishing this. I need to try to cover 3 chapters of class, and we should be okay on finishing up on time. So sorry if it seems like a hurried class, but we're going to have about 15 minutes a chapter to cover this material. So with that, we come back, and we now want to look in chapter 34 and look at this story of Dinah. And as we've already mentioned, we have the sons listed, but this is a daughter that was listed. Do we remember who she was the daughter of? Leah. Very good. Exactly right. Leah. Very good. So let's look at what happens here. We pick up in verse 1. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and violated her. Okay? So there is the problem. There is why we have this story, is because of what was done there. Picking back up in verse 3. His soul was strongly attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman and spoke kindly to the young woman. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor and said, "Give me this young woman as a wife." And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah his daughter. Now his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob held his peace until they came. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak to him. So notice Jacob, the sons are out in the field. Jacob hears this story, what has happened, and he's not doing anything at this point. He's not taking any initiative. But what does happen? Hamor and Shechem are going to come to Jacob, are going to come to Jacob to try to marry the woman, Dinah. So they're coming to him now to try to work out a marriage. Now, I've lost my place where I was. Verse 6. Thank you. The sons of Jacob came in from the field, and they heard it. Okay? So, verse 6, then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. So now, that's what's going on, and then the sons come in, and the sons hear about it. Verse 7, and the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved and very angry, because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing which ought not to be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife, and make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take your daughters to yourselves. So you shall dwell with us in the land, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade in it, and acquire possessions for yourselves in it. Then Shechem said to her father and her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me, I will give. Now notice, that's going to be very important. Whatever you say, I will give. Verse 12, ask me ever so much dowry and gift, and I will give according to what you say to me. But give me the young woman as a wife. So, the sons have got something in mind here. And that's what we see next in the next section. But the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father, and spoke deceitfully, because he had defiled Dinah their sister. And they said to them, we cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a reproach to us. But on this condition we will consent to you. If you will become as we are, if every male of you is circumcised, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. But if you will not heed us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and be gone. And the words, verse 18, and the words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. So the young man did not delay to do the thing, because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. He was more honorable than all the household of his father. And Hamor and Shechem, his son, came to the gate of the city. Now, what have I done? There we go. Came to the gate of the city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, these men are at peace with us. Therefore, let them dwell in the land and trade in it. For indeed, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men consent to dwell with us, to be one people. If every male among us is circumcised, as they are circumcised, will not their livestock, their property, and every animal of theirs be ours? Only let us consent to them, and they will dwell with us. And all who went out of the gate of the city heeded Hamor and Shechem his son. Every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of the city. And so we see now they persuade the men to go through with this. Verse 25. Now it came to pass on the third day, when they were in pain, that the two sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came boldly upon the city and killed all the males. And they killed Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went out. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city, because their sister had been defiled. They took their sheep, their oxen, their donkeys, what was in the city and what was in the field, and all their wealth. All their little ones and their wives they took as captive, and they plundered even all that was in the houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have troubled me by making me obnoxious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And since I am few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me. I shall be destroyed, my household and I. But they said, should he treat our sister like a harlot? So with that, we have the end of that story, just sort of that abrupt end, and then we're going to move on. But notice who Jacob directed his comments toward there in verse 25. The two sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, it seems they were the two that actually went out and did the killing. And then later it says the sons of Jacob plundered the city. So it seems that the two killed all the males, and the rest of the brothers joined in and plundered the city. And part of it might have to do with age, because obviously Simeon and Levi were older of the brothers, right? And so it also might be that the other brothers were just younger and not capable of joining in. But whatever the case, Simeon and Levi were the ones that Jacob addressed specifically about what they had done. Even though it says that in verse 27 that the sons of Jacob plundered the city. Now, also think about the two, Simeon and Levi. Because Jacob's got 12 sons, right? So just for a minute, notice who these sons were. Who was their mother? Simeon and Levi. Leah. And that was Dinah's mother also, right? So they weren't just half brother and sister, but they had the same mother and had the same father. And so maybe they were moved with more indignation and anger because it was their full-blooded relative that had been taken advantage of there. And let's see. And it's also interesting to notice, just we're not given an explanation why, but Levi is not mentioned. Levi was the oldest brother. Excuse me, Reuben, thank you. Reuben was not mentioned. He was the oldest brother, but it was Simeon who was the second-born son, and Levi who was the third-born son that we read here in this story. And so, yes, sir.
Well, just a note, which will come up in a later story, but Reuben seems to be a little bit more level-headed, less hot-headed than his brother, basically.
Mm-hmm.
He'll be here later on, you'll see, he's caught up in some sin, sleeping with concubine, and then he's the oldest and should have been given the blessing, but he's not given the cost of that sin. Later on, we'll get him.
Yes, sir.
As far as the hot-headedness, when they're all wanting to kill Joseph, he's the one that says, no, don't kill it. Just, so
Yeah.
he's the one that convinces them not to not kill it.
Yeah. But neither good, but thinking about this story, neither good nor bad, he's just not mentioned. For whatever reason, obviously we don't know, but for whatever reason, he's not mentioned as being called out there, even though he would have been the oldest son. Thank you for the comments. Any further comments we might have at this point? Yes, sir.
Well, while it was a deceitful thing, you can see that the practical application that's going to come out of it. Had they not done something, they might have started intermingling with the Canaanites, and that would have been, I would think, in direct violation of what God had wanted. That they would have become kind of like the Canaanites, intermarrying and that kind of thing.
If they hadn't agreed, they probably were going to. They seem to be quite aggravated about it. They probably wouldn't have intermingled. They probably would have left. If, for example, Jacob had prevented them from taking out vengeance, they probably would have left town or something. But you make a good point. You make a good point. Thank you for that. Yes, sir.
They didn't lie, they said if y'all do become circumcised, we're gonna be one nation, because y'all ain't not gonna be around any longer. They didn't lie.
Thank y'all for the help during the